Next couple of speakers, Richard Nash and Nikki Ozer, will be diving into some much more specific instances about data and how readers interact with it and the ramifications for it. So, Richard Nash, thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. It's one of the things I love but also hate about books and browsers is that I feel the obligation to do something new each time because there's such freshness here, and also because Peter brings such a generous audience. So I feel I can take the risk of trying out something quite new. I would hesitate to claim that it is maybe super specific and super granular, and that in any sense I actually know what I'm talking about here. But it's an effort to try to start thinking about reading data via a somewhat different frame. So I'm going to be doing this somewhat in real time, figuring it out somewhat in real time. About 2 minutes of my talk changed about 5 minutes ago based on a conversation I just had with George Walkley from Hachette. So it's a work in progress. Even, in fact, the title of the talk came from a conference I was at 36 hours ago. So let me sort of try to offer what some of my initial feelings were that gave rise to this talk. Over the past year or so, I've been advocating for a reconception of the writing-reading economy, let's say, as a service economy, as opposed to a manufacturing economy. And so expressing the idea of reading as a service. Obviously existing in things like subscription models, but I think it's in many ways implied across a number of areas. Now, a lot of the data that goes on around thinking about reading as a service has been producer-focused, right? Which is perfectly reasonable, since producers need to create content, whether those are individual authors or the companies that support and partner with them. There's an entire universe of work being done around personalizing education, educational and instructional materials, and that relies on analytics to understand how people are learning and how individuals may be learning and how it can be personalized for their brains, their habits. And it is sort of perfectly reasonable to sort of say, right, well, that is where data is meaningful in and around the writing-reading economy to improve skills acquisitions outcomes. But I think there's large swathes of creative endeavor where this kind of data is completely beside the point. When the creator is engaged in an emotional act, in an act of self-expression, where communication is less about feedback loops designed to improve your output and more about the authenticity of the output itself. We don't read Margaret Atwood in order to help Margaret Atwood become a better writer. We read Margaret Atwood to have some new sense of the world that we are getting from her. So this is sort of a very long preamble to slide 2. Which is, to my mind, the funniest image I can use to talk about what is otherwise a tremendously pedantic subject, choice architecture. The idea that given what we now know about how irrational we really are as human beings, it is good public policy to frame choices in a way that makes us more likely to do the optimal thing. What Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein's book called, in its title, The Nudge, the fly in the urinal, toward which men are more likely to aim is placed where there will be the least splashback, making life better for you and the next person and the cleaning staff. Kin to choice architecture, sort of a necessary, if not yet sufficient, condition for choice architecture, is a phrase, the quantified self, coined by a man who is no stranger to books and browsers, Kevin Kelly, to architect choices, whether it is the trajectory of your pee, or the size of the scoop, how many scoops of ice cream you're going to eat, or the intensity of your workout, or the intensity of your wine drinking, you need data. And since choice architecture is about enabling individual choice, then it is about your data. Which brings me to where the name of my talk just came from, small data. Small data is a term, I mean, given the millions of people now using the term big data, there's probably hundreds of people out there using the term small data, but I first came across it 36 hours ago from a woman named Deborah Estrin, who's a professor of computer science at the new Cornell Tech campus in New York, but her background is in medicine and health policy, and she's co-founder of a nonprofit startup called OpenM Health, which is and the term small data is an effort to try to get at looking at all the kind of digital breadcrumbs that we as individuals create and leave behind us every second of the day as we use our mobile phones, as we even use our laptops, and as we interface and engage in differing ways with the things that the internet is now connecting, that get captured by all this hardware and software. In her case, she's talking not just about things like motion and where we are in space, and not necessarily just about what we ingest or how fast we walk or obvious medical data, but even things like doing semantic analysis of our texts and figuring out what mood we might be in, and understanding maybe over the course of 20 years how we may be slowly drifting toward dementia. But the upshot of this all is that small data is my data. That's the core of what she means, and how I'm using the phrase small data is to describe your own kind of personal universe. And what interests me about reading data is that it is data about my reading, not about your writing. And while there is, again, I don't wish in any way to sort of diminish the value of understanding your writing. I think we've been talking a lot about this in the industry over the last few years, and what I'm wanting to encourage more conversation around is my reading, which my is used in the universal my rather than my own personal reading, which is not that interesting. So by giving, I feel, readers their data, it's also going to have a nice side effect, which is that it makes readers more aware of their data. And the next speaker up from the ACLU is obviously going to be able to speak with much greater knowledge, granularity, and insight around issues of privacy, which both health, which is an area in which this sort of quantified self has begun, and reading, which is another area where we have strong emotional feelings about who has access to our data and how it is used. But the more that readers can think of having their own reading experience disclosed to them, the more that you build a culture in which people value ownership. Now, let me then try to sort of talk a little bit about why I think reading in particular benefits from this quantified self movement. The benefits of exercise, right, of healthy eating are by and large extremely well documented at this point. And even the benefits of complex and immersive reading are now becoming more and more well documented. But in both cases here, the payoff is long, and the opportunity cost is now. I will gladly run on the treadmill Tuesday for a hamburger today. And Tuesday, of course, never comes. As St. Augustine taught us, there are many things that we might want in the future that would be good for us or are worthy, but please let me not have to do it right now. Whether that is LOL cats or a hamburger. And so the opportunity to allow us to understand our own reading gives us an opportunity to make more informed choices. In my dataverse, in the world of my own particular data, so some of you might have noticed already that I'm wearing a jawbone up, so clearly I have, drunk the Kool-Aid of the quantified self. I started reading more because of this health monitoring device. Because Jawbone pointed out that I was getting significantly less, on average an hour a night, less deep sleep than other men in their 40s. And it suggested that a thing I could do to improve how much deep sleep I got each night was to put screens away before I went to sleep and instead read a print book. Although it is also true that e-ink devices have functioned similarly. And it worked. On nights when I read for a half an hour before I went to sleep, my deep sleep increased by 20 to 30 minutes. And that, in a certain sense, crystallized for me how goddamn suggestible we all are. If I were to introduce if I were to have introduced myself today, I would have introduced myself as the man lucky to have been one of Matthew Battle's publishers, because I published a short story collection of Matthew Battle's called The Sovereignties of Invention, which I recommend to you all. But so I'm a publisher. I've spent 10 years publishing independent literary fiction and political and pop cultural nonfiction, making an average salary of $25,000 a year. So I was doing it because I absolutely fucking loved it. And yet it took the Jawbone app to get me to read more. So this suggests how incredibly useful reading data could be around doing that thing that publishers are always asking of startups and other companies who are coming into the publishing space to do, which is to grow the damn pie. How do we grow the pie rather than reallocate how the pie is divvied up amongst authors and aggregators and publishers and retailers and so on and so forth? Now, there are examples out there of where our cultural activities are sort of drifting into a universe of quantified self, and Last FM is a really nice example of where your music listening, they offer beautiful data visualizations for how a particular person listens to music. And what that offers is somebody, in particular, the opportunity to be bust out of a rut, to break out of habits that you get sick of. So in this case, a person might have realized by looking at this that they've been listening to too much Dorian Concept for the last 2 weeks, and they want to change and start listening to Ochre. This is not my stuff. This is just a screen capture from the Last FM website. there are a couple, I'm glad to say, examples of very early efforts in this area from two startups, one of which I found out about because I've started yapping about this idea of reading and the quantified self in a couple of interviews, and a company called Roundview, ROUNDVIEW.co, not .com, has basically taken the Instapaper readability and Pocket APIs and offered reading analytics around what is going on in those. It's a useful, they're in completely alpha mode, so they would benefit very much from the kind of people who attend books and browsers from going to use it and offering themselves up to do some user interviews. And then the second example, I literally, as one I alluded to at the beginning, I just heard about from George Walkley, which is a company called Degreed, which is a startup that focuses on credentialing, on personal credentialing. So it allows you, if you went to Princeton and Yale Law School, you can tell them I went to Princeton and Yale Law School, and it'll give you 15,000 points, let's say, for having be so spectacularly well credentialed, but it will also give you 5 points, say I'm pulling these numbers out of my ass, 5 points for attending books and browsers, and 20 points for doing a Coursera course. And for our purposes, most interestingly, it will give you points for reading a George Packer article in the New Yorker, or for reading all of Thomas Piketty. So it is a way of recognizing that a variety of sort of private activities are useful in terms of self-improvement, and whether, in their case, obviously, they're using this data in a more public way than I am understanding it, or than I am discussing, but it is nevertheless a sort of an instance of some of the use cases that can occur if we have our reading experiences quantified in an ongoing on an ongoing basis. Unfortunately, that's about all I have to say in terms of actual show and tell. So this is very much, I frequently get asked by people, what are the opportunities? If I want to do a startup in the book publishing space, what should it be? Where is there space? Where can value be created? And I think, there's an enormous number of problems to be solved. We've heard about some already. We're going to hear about a lot more. But I would like to add one other big problem to be solved, which is how do we build how do we let people read themselves, right? How do we let you read your reading? How do we let you understand your reading and integrate it more fully into your life so that you will do more reading? So thank you very much.